Welcome to today's Explainer. We're unpacking a really fascinating framework drawn directly from a translated essay titled The Spiritual Life by Xu. Now, whether you're totally well-versed in theology or you just love exploring different intricate philosophical structures, this text is definitely going to grab your attention. It meticulously categorizes human existence in a highly engaging, structured way. We're going to look at everything through the exact lens of the author's own logic, breaking down these incredibly deep concepts to make them crystal clear. Okay, let's dive into this with a direct question straight from the core premise of our source text. Which of the three categories of life are you currently living? It's a bold question, right? I mean, the framework posits that every single human being on Earth can essentially be sorted into one of three distinct buckets. As we go through these categories today, I want you to keep this question in the back of your mind and really reflect on where the text might place your own daily pursuits. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering 1. The three categories of life. 2. The extraordinary spiritual life. 3. The path of Jesus. 4. Core teachings and metaphors. And finally, 5. Entering the narrow gate.
Section 1. Three categories of life.
So Xu actually takes the entirety of the human experience and mathematically segments it. According to the text, the vast majority of humanity, we're talking a staggering 80 to 85%, are living the mortal life. It's the overwhelmingly dominant slice of the human pie. But what exactly defines this? Well, individuals in this category are essentially driven by worldly pursuits. They live for money, food, status, fame, and interpersonal friendship. If your primary daily focus is just on these tangible earthly matters, the framework definitively classifies you as living a mortal life.
Moving up the pyramid, a much smaller demographic, only about 5 to 10%, leads what is termed the wise life. This group has fundamentally moved beyond basic survival and worldly status. Instead, they dedicate themselves to higher ideals. They pursue truth. They actively seek out spiritual wealth, honesty, kindness, beauty, and love. Their overarching goal is the creation of harmonious societies. You can think of them as the philosophers, the deep thinkers, and the societal builders.
Now, what's really interesting about this breakdown is this final, razor-thin slice of the population. The text asserts that only a highly rare 2 to 5% actually achieve the ultimate state, the spiritual life. This is the absolute pinnacle of the hierarchy. It's a highly exclusive group that operates on a completely different frequency than the rest of humanity. To truly understand this elite 2 to 5%, we need to look at exactly how the source text defines them. The spiritual life belongs to those whose central life focus is revering the greatest creator. They comprehend the deep underlying mysteries of the Tao, they relentlessly seek supreme enlightenment, and they aim for the absolute highest state of existence possible. The essay literally describes this tiny group as the seeds of heaven and the true essence of humanity. Section 2. The extraordinary spiritual life.
So, what does this rarest form of life actually look like on the inside? How do these individuals operate day to day? Well, the framework outlines a very specific checklist of traits. First off, they completely abandon reliance on their own worldly cleverness, trusting entirely in their hearts and spiritual intuition. And get this, the source explicitly states they belong to no organized religions whatsoever, nor do they place their hopes in nations or human leaders. They are entirely independent of all earthly institutions. Instead, they maintain this unbreakable, direct bond with the Creator. While their physical bodies are here on Earth, their hearts are described as spiritually transcending time and space. Externally, they're retiring, unassuming, and characterized by a profound, radiant inner peace. Essentially, they've forgotten their own worldly survival in order to walk this path.
Section 3. The path of Jesus. If the spiritual life is the ultimate goal, how exactly does one get there? Right here, we see a major pivot in the text, from philosophical categorization to a highly prescribed theological methodology. So the crucial point is, the author makes a definitive claim. The best and essentially exclusive road to the spiritual path is following the teachings of Jesus Christ. The essay argues that the entire mission and sole purpose of Jesus coming to earth was to teach humanity how to walk the way of the greatest creator. It positions Jesus not just as a wise teacher, but literally as the absolute mechanical door to the spiritual life we just defined. Section 4. Core teachings and metaphors. To explain what following these teachings actually entails, the framework relies heavily on specific imagery. It establishes a stark dichotomy between the mortal life and the spiritual life through the metaphor of treasure. On one side, we have treasures on earth, the money, the status, and the material goods that drive that huge 85% of the population. These are fragile. They're easily destroyed by moth and rust or simply stolen by thieves. On the other side are treasures in heaven, which are eternal and completely secure. The core message here is all about focus. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You just cannot attach your heart to the mortal world and expect to live the spiritual life. This illustrates another key requirement: action versus passive listening. The author uses the well-known parable of the two builders. The foolish man hears the spiritual teachings but doesn't actually put them into practice. He builds his house on sand. And when the inevitable storms of life hit, it collapses with a great crash. The wise man, however, takes the teachings and acts on them, building a rock-solid foundation that can withstand any wind or rain. The text is making it incredibly clear that theoretical knowledge of the spiritual life is practically useless without rigorous practical application. Next, the framework highlights the profound, almost supernatural power of genuine faith. The text quotes the famous mustard seed metaphor, suggesting that if one possesses even the tiniest speck of true, concentrated spiritual faith, literally nothing will be impossible for them. It's a powerful reminder within the structural logic that the spiritual life is simply not bound by the standard physical limitations that govern the mortal life. When you distill all these teachings down, the text presents a set of deeply challenging, actionable rules of self-renunciation. To enter the spiritual kingdom, one must become humble and radically open, like a little child. One must prioritize the spiritual kingdom above absolutely all worldly anxieties about food or clothing. The phrases, "let the dead bury their own dead," and "do not look back from the plow" strictly enforce the idea of prioritizing the spiritual path over conventional earthly obligations and attachments. Ultimately, the framework demands that you must be willing to lose your earthly, mortal life in order to truly find your spiritual one.
Let's move to Section 5, Entering the Narrow Gate, and see how this builds.
Everything we've discussed culminates in this incredibly powerful visual of two roads. On one side is the wide gate and the broad road. It's easy, it's crowded, but the text asserts it leads straight to destruction. This perfectly maps back to that massive 85% of people living the mortal life we saw at the very beginning of this explainer. On the flip side is the small gate and the narrow road. It requires sacrifice, it's difficult to find, and only a few ever travel it, representing that super rare 2 to 5% living the spiritual life. To hammer home exactly what it takes to walk that narrow road, the author shares this specific anecdote. The kingdom of heaven is like a merchant searching for fine pearls. Upon finding one of ultimate, transcendent value, he doesn't hesitate for a second. He goes away, sells absolutely everything he owns, and buys it. This story beautifully encapsulates the absolute, all-consuming sacrifice the text claims is required. The spiritual life is the pearl of great price. It demands you let go of your entire mortal life inventory to attain it. Synthesizing the entire essay, Zhu Feng provides us with this final, clear-cut, three-step formula. Step 1. You must enter through the narrow gate, which the text explicitly identifies as Jesus Christ. Step 2. You must actively follow and practice those teachings, turning away from all worldly attachments to walk the greatest Creator's path. Step 3. By maintaining this rigorous spiritual refinement, you ultimately arrive at the final destination, which the author terms the kingdom of the greatest Creator, or the Elysium world. So that brings us right back to you. We've traced the logic of this text from the broad mortal masses all the way down to the rare few who actually find the spiritual life. The framework demands complete self-renunciation and unyielding focus. So leaving you with a final provocative thought based strictly on the source text. Are you willing to sell everything you have to walk the narrow road? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive into Shui Feng's theological framework. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.